All right, this next one I want to cover is it goes back a ways, but I think it's really fun, and it's something also I think ties together well with our special guest here. And this is an article about myths about indentation. And Guido, I picked this one because you were talking about this on Twitter just the other day. What was the motivation to throw that out there?
That is a good question. I was just going to volunteer the answer because apparently I had a link to that article on my homepage in some odd corner, and I have a very, very sort of ratty old homepage. I've moved it to GitHub Pages, but it looks like Web 1.0, and because it really is, I just
it blends in right with Netscape, huh?
So someone reported to me a broken link, which happens like, I don't know, once every 4 years or so. Someone reported a broken link. Oh wait, it wasn't even on my homepage. It was on an old blog that I can no longer edit at artema.com. I'm very glad that blog is still online. But so, because I got the report of the broken link, I decided, I'm sure I can still find on archive.org where that link used to point. And sure enough, it was there. And I thought, that's actually still a neat little article. So I thought, okay, tweet of the day.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's interesting as well. And just to give you a sense of why it might have disappeared, it was one of those types of sites where the domain or the URL included a tilde username path, like used to get in university or whatever way back when. So anyway, this one is myths about indentation for Python. And for people who come from a C-oriented language, I think Python can come across a little bit funky. I actually want to share a little story of just sort of my journey with it and how I came to love this. But I think this is really interesting for people having the debate about, is significant white space useful? Is it weird? Is it good? I did a ton of C++ and then C# development. So it was all, and then JavaScript development. It was all about the curly brace languages. Lots of symbols. And then I came to learn Python, and I loved Python right away, but it was weird to me. I felt kind of naked. Like if I'd write an if statement, I'm like, I need some little parentheses to kind of hold the code in place. And why don't they need to be there? And I need a curly brace to like say when this block of code is done and whatnot. And it just took a little bit of getting used to, but I knew that it was the right thing for me, because when I went back to work on some older projects, I'm like, why are there symbols everywhere? What is all this stuff I have to keep typing? This is like a broken language. And it just took a couple of weeks for me to like make that switch to feel like it was broken to go back to work in languages I've been doing for like 10 years. So well done with the white space, Guido.
Thanks.
Yeah. But so let's cover some of the things mentioned really quick in the article. One is that white space is significant in Python source code. And actually, no, not in general is the answer. It's significant on the left. So, right? So as much as you indent stuff, that really means things. But between variables, like whether you have like A equals 7 or A space equals space 7, doesn't matter. You can have tons of spaces in there, right? Like any other language, the spaces kind of don't matter except for on the left. So that's cool. And also the amount of indentation doesn't really matter, right? You could have 5 spaces for any code suite that you want, or you could have 18, or you could go with a standard 4. I recommend the 4, but you know. And then also, if you have something that defines like a list comprehension or an array creation or a dictionary, then all of a sudden the spacing doesn't matter anymore, right? As soon as you have like an open square bracket and then you have a bunch of stuff and then close square bracket, spacing doesn't matter in there. So I think this is interesting to think about as folks debate that maybe within their teams. It also, you could say it forces you to use a certain indentation style. Well, yes and no. If you wanted to write it single statement per line, then yeah, there's a cool example that they gave in the article is like if 1 + 1 = 2, then new line, print food, new line, print bar, new line, print, or just say x = 42. You can also put them on multiple lines with semicolons. If you're really missing your semicolons from your language, you could do that. But the thing that's interesting here, I think this is probably the most significant part of this article or this write-up, is if you look at it, it looks right. And when it gets parsed, it is right. There's an example of some C code that looks visually wrong because it's indented differently, but it's going to parse. But the way you see it when you read it is not what's actually happening. And I think there was a problem like this. Well, I think it was in some either Objective-C. It was something with Apple.
There was an
really
infamous Apple vulnerability. I think it might even have been on the iPhone, where someone had added a second statement to a block, but it wasn't a block because there were no curlies.
Right. That it started out with a single conditional line, like if something, indent, do the thing. And then they just indented, but they didn't put the curly braces in. And but it took so long for people to find it because visually it looked like what Python would actually mean, right? It looked like those two things were part of the if block, but because the white space didn't matter, it actually didn't. And so, yeah, that's really interesting. I'm not going to go through everything. I'll put it in the show notes. But another one that I thought is like, I just don't like it. And that's fine. People can not like it. But it has a lot of advantages. Like in that example before, if you had that wrongly indented Python code, it would not parse. It's an error to have it not look right, and rather than just not be right. So it has a lot of advantages, and people can really quickly get used to not having to write all those symbols. And then you go back and you're like, this code is hard to read. It's just full of curly braces, semicolons, parentheses everywhere. I always thought that is what builds programming languages. To have a programming language, you had to have that. And then once I experienced Python and I went back, it broke my mental model of the world. I'm like, you don't actually have to have those things. So why are they there? Anyway, what do you think about this article? You must like it somewhat because you hunted it down and tweeted it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's old news for me because I didn't even invent the white space thing for Python. That was sort of handed to me on a silver platter by one of my mentors in the early 80s.
Yeah, back in the ABC days.
And in those days, it was an innovation. There was like one other language that had this, and Knut had once said that he thought it would be a good idea, but he had never actually implemented the language or even experienced the language that implemented it. He just thought that it would be a good idea.
Right.
So the only thing that was a stumbling block for me was when I first started looking at Python, the editor I was using, I think it was an Emacs something at the time. I'm not sure what I was using. But with the C++ code I was using, I had it set up so that if I double clicked on the closing bracket, it would jump to the top of the block. And I really liked that feature. And for some reason, that's the reason why I didn't like the white space thing at first. But
how do I get back?
But then I just went, okay, I'm gonna like beginner's mind, just open mind, just embrace it and learn it as a new thing. And I didn't, like a week later, I didn't even miss it. So
yeah. And of course, the newer editors like PyCharm and stuff, at the bottom, they have little breadcrumbs of, here's the class, here's the function, here's the if, here's the while, whatever. And you can jump between them, just like you were talking about, but like the entire hierarchy of like, I don't know, the tokens or whatever.
Yeah, and I tend to write smaller functions now, so it's not as much of a deal.
This is probably a good thing that it was hard.
I was thinking that too, actually, that if you needed the editor to help you find the top of the block, it must be pretty far away.
Yeah.
It's 4,000 lines. I hate scrolling so much. These functions are hard.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching this segment of the Python Bytes podcast. This video was made during the recording of the full episode. Visit pythonbytes.fm and get the whole story. Subscribe to the podcast and get the entire episode delivered to your phone. Please support our work by taking one of the courses at pythonbytes.fm/courses or learning PyTest with Brian's book at pythonbytes.fm/PyTest. Finally, visit our sponsor shown on the screen here. Visit the link on the screen and get the special offer for Python Bytes and YouTube listeners. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.